該。OK。
秘書處可唔可以第11分鐘？
Would the Secretariat please tell us when we reach 11 minutes?
點啊？唔知你想揾咩？
好，好多謝各位。
Thank you, friends of the media. Welcome to the press conference on the Public Accounts Committee relating to PAC report number 74. We have 8 chapters, and the Legislative Council has prepared the report. We've selected 5 of the 8 chapters to prepare reports, in which we conducted detailed investigation in the two of the reports. As for the remaining reports, we introduced a new system that is, for these selected chapters, we first of all put questions to the relevant government bureaus and departments. When we failed to obtain answers, we held a 30-minute hearing for each of these chapters, and we are very happy with the result. And let me first say something about the 2 detailed reports about the sports sector in Hong Kong. The first one is about Chapter 1. That is about the Hong Kong Football Association, and the next one is about the Sports Federation and Olympic Committee of Hong Kong, China. I'd like to thank the Secretariat for their research and hard effort. The responsible members for the first chapter is Mr. Kenneth Leung and Mr. Stephen Ho, and for the second chapter, Mr. Lam Chuk Ting and Ms. Tanya Chan. Now the quorum bell is ringing, and we will have to leave any minute, save the 2 responsible members to take questions from the floor. So in 8 minutes, we'll have to go back to the chamber because the bell is ringing, and then we'll come back. Mr. Leung. Friends of the media, good afternoon. I'm responsible for Chapter 1, Management of Funding for Sports Development through the Arts and Sports Development Fund Sports portion. Both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 relate to sports development in Hong Kong. As background information, the Arts and Sports Development Fund had a balance of some $300 million as of the 31st of March 2019. And in 2018-19, the fund subsidized 116 sports programs, with the funding allocated to a tune of $123 million. We had 4 public hearings, and one issue in the limelight is about subvention for the Hong Kong Football Association and the development of football in Hong Kong. 17% of the public are frequent spectators of football games in Hong Kong, 17%, and that's according to a public survey. So when it comes to the Hong Kong Football Association, or the HKFA, we have the Phoenix Project before 2015, and between 2015 and 2020, the Hong Kong FA had a 5-year strategic plan to take forward development of football in Hong Kong. The ASDF, Arts and Sports Development Fund, reserves a funding of $25 million on an annual basis for the 5-year strategic development plan. And the 5-year plan was completed on the 31st of March this year. On whether the plan should be extended or renewed, the Home Affairs Bureau has made the decision, I believe. the Director of Audit has compiled a report relating to the Hong Kong Football Association. Our conclusion is that although the HKFA is an independent legal entity, receiving subvention from the government amounting to about 37% of their total income, and in spite of that, HKFA, after all, is a subvented organization, and there are governance issues identified. For example, in relation to the board members and the president, the meetings attendance rate is on the low side. In fact, the president didn't attend a single meeting in 4 years. And in this report, there is the mentioning of the Audit Committee. This is mentioned in the HKFA's annual report. But between July 2015 and June 2020, the Audit Committee was never set up. There was only a convener without any member. There is also another committee. For example, Marketing and Communications Committee, that did not prepare minutes of the meeting throughout the years. There are also other issues, such as recruitment, because the 5-year strategic plan of HKFA allows recruitment of members. It detailed the recruitment process, deployment of manpower resources, and the association also had a high wastage rate. Chapter 1 mentions, apart from the HKFA, other matters. For example, some of the subventions went to supporting district football development. Well, the reality at the moment is that there seems to be only one football team at the district level, and the district officers did not follow up on late submission of reports. Now, members, you may be interested that our focus seems to be on the HKFA, because over the past few years, according to the Secretary for Home Affairs, it was the period of an ice age, and that in terms of the use of funding and other governance issues of the HKFA, they have been under the radar. After our meetings, the HAB has floated a new proposal in relation to subvention. They will continue to provide funding to the HKFA, but then the HKFA will be required to submit a report on a 3-month basis. Now, we have made really strong criticisms on the HKFA in our report. We find it alarming and unacceptable. And we hope that in the short, medium, and long term, the HKFA can take on board all the recommendations made by the Director of Audit and also the recommendations by our committee at the hearings for proper use of public money and also for promoting football development in Hong Kong. And that's briefly what I have to say about this chapter.
I'll
call upon Mr. Lam, Mr. Chen, Mr. Ho. Thank you. The Vice Chairman referred to the criticisms of the HAFA, which is rather comprehensive. I'd just like to add that the HAB, regarding the funding and the supervision of the operation of the FA, had not really been vigilant and had not ensured, reasonable use of public funds to the satisfaction of public expectations. During the public hearing, we often hear that the FA operates independently and it shouldn't be subject to any interference. I'm sorry, do we need to go back to the chamber? Okay, I'll go on for 1 more minute. The HAB very often claims that the HAFA operates independently and therefore does not intervene with its operation. Regarding the approval of funding and the tenders and the minutes of the meetings, the HAB have not really, exercised any supervision. While the FA has to bear the responsibility, the SA government also had failed in its supervision of the FA and has to be held responsible. I hope that the SA government will really review the situation, which shouldn't be the case that just because the FA operates independently, it should be free from supervision. I hope that the government will understand that you can outsource the work, but you cannot outsource your responsibility. Okay, we'll go back to the chamber now, and we'll be back, in a while. I think you may actually raise questions regarding this particular chapter. Perhaps meanwhile I will stand in for the chairman. Let's finish with this chapter first. Basically, I'd like to talk about the Hong Kong Football Association. Football is not just a game for men. It's not just the spectators. I think women football has also developed very well in recent years. Like the vice chairman said, when we talk about the HAB, especially the funding under the ASDF and the allocation to the FA has a long history. In 2008, there was a motion in LegCo by members, and after the motion was endorsed, starting in 2009, the HAB engaged a consultant to prepare the report. Subsequently, the HAFA submitted a proposal for the Phoenix project, and since it has received funding of $20 million every year from 2015 to 2020, every year the funding to the FA has gone up to $25 million annually. In the first 5-year plan from 2010 to 2015, there were 5 objectives: to cater to the development of football for different age groups, to nurture, football talent, local talent, to upgrade the standard of football in Hong Kong, and governance. But in the end, we found out that the funding under the ASDF was spent to pay for staff costs, and there were more than 20 positions in the FA. I think the AJ panel earlier this week had also had a report regarding the future 5-year plan of the FA. I understand that the government in principle accepted that report, but it also made some suggestions and and instructed that the FA should actively follow up on the recommendations of the audit report, and that it should submit a detailed report in September, which will have to be approved by its board as to how it's going to implement all the recommendations made in the audit report. What I'd like to talk about now is governance of the FA. I think if you have been following public hearings, you would have seen that some people appear in at the first hearing and then did not come anymore, and so this is because there's a very high turnover rate among the staff of the FA. Many of its senior management, I don't know whether it's by coincidence that they have left the FA because of the 5-year plan. We don't know the reason for that, but basically I'd like to follow up on one obvious issue, which the chairman alluded to earlier on, which is the audit committee of the FA. The audit committee is a standing committee, and when the FA has become a limited company by guarantee, they seem to have set up a very vigorous structure, apparently trying to improve their corporate governance, but in the end, the implementation actually was still has fallen short of what they say in the Articles of Association. The vice chairman referred to one committee, which is the audit committee, and the FA only just appointed a convener. I'm sorry, I don't agree that the person was the convener. It was called the chairman then. and that person had been the chairman of the committee. He had never convened a meeting over a course of 4 years or appointed any of its members. According to the internal information of the FA, another committee had a convener, which is the Strategy and Finance Committee. It was that chairman who should be the convener of the Audit Committee. And let us not forget, before the announcement of the audit report, the FA had a chance to read that report beforehand. At the time, they did not identify this problem, and when they attended our hearing, they tried very hard to justify their claim, actually saying that the person was just a convener. Honestly, if for personal reasons that person could not attend meetings, fine. But the serious mistake they made is that in their annual report, they claim that in the statement that the statement had been approved by its audit committee, but that audit committee had never appeared over the course of 4 years. But despite that, they say this in the annual report under the corporate governance section. More interestingly, we asked them why they have made that mistake consecutively for 3 years, and they told us that the annual report was only marketing materials. It was only, promotion materials. If the public is interested, they can certainly, read that online, but they don't guarantee the accuracy of the information. So what kind of a mentality is that? The management of the FA are actually, being paid by these $25 million. So how can they be held accountable? The government's response is that for the next 5 years, the government apparently has decided to cut the salaries of some of its senior management to ensure that resources are being spent on training and development. We had the opportunity to actually read the subvention agreement. Now, honestly, the subvention agreement was quite well written, giving the government the power to suspend the subvention. It also placed many responsibilities on the FA. For example, when certain important positions have become vacant, they should inform the government. But how stringently did the government monitor the FA, and whether or not the FA had followed up on that seriously, I don't know. I think the FA, many members of the senior management of the FA has left, so I don't know what is the situation in respect of the recruitment of the replacement. A few years ago during the review, they say they say they didn't know how to handle late applications and so on. So I find it very odd for a company which has been, in existence for so many years, and they still have to be taught how to handle those things. There were many other issues. For example, some of the meetings had not been convened, and the FA has a very cumbersome corporate structure. So I think, well, first of all, I have to thank the Audit Commission for publishing this report, which provided a detailed account saying that some of the subvention had not been spent properly and that there are inadequacies. Now, whether we're talking about the subvention or the ASDF or another subvention, the sport subvention fund, sport development fund, I think the amount actually is the largest among all those given to NSAs. So putting the two subventions together is a very large amount. But on the other hand, we're not seeing particular, good, achievements in terms of sports development. So although we're not into the third 5-year plan yet, but it's very likely that we're into the 10th year already. So the government should, I think, for the forthcoming, half-yearly report, I think in 2023 we should have more stringent supervision of the FA. Otherwise, the FA's reliance on government subvention will become, will increase, and the government will have to, provide more and more subvention.
Mr. Lam, anything to add? If not, then we will proceed to Chapter 2, the second report. Mr. Lam and Ms. Chan are the responsible members. So, Mr. Lam, friends of the media, this is the report on Sports Federation and Olympic Committee of Hong Kong, China, and this is mainly about governance issues. I'll leave the rest to Ms. Tanya Chan. I just want to focus on the selection criteria for athletes to participate in the Asian Games. The Director of Audit's report has revealed a case which was also reported in the media about the selection criteria for a swimming event in the Asian Games that sparked some controversies. The bone of contention is this. The quickest swimmer for breaststroke in Hong Kong was not qualified for selection, whereas the slowest swimmer was able to join. So that attracted a lot of attention in the swimming sector and the community. So the Director of Audit looked into the case, and at the public hearing, I also meticulously asked questions relating to the case. All in all, in terms of selection of athletes and the arrangements put in place by the SFNOC, there's been a lack of transparency and incorrect information, leading to doubts about the impartiality of the selection process. We find it alarming and unacceptable. Let me very briefly talk about the problems identified in the selection of athletes. According to the guidelines drawn up by the SFNOC, the process should be open, transparent, and there should be open and transparent selection criteria that all coaches and athletes should know with great certainty. Regrettably, we've discovered that the selection criteria adopted by the SFNOC are different from those adopted by the NSAs. And the SFNOC's selection committee did not even follow their own selection criteria. Instead, they have their own selection criteria without anything in writing to explain to us what the latest selection criteria actually meant as they presented themselves at the public hearing. Mr. Ronnie Wong, Secretary General of the SFNOC, and also the Executive Director, Mr. Chang, were witnesses of the PAC public hearings, and on numerous occasions, they claimed that this new set of selection criteria was known to all athletes, coaches, NSAs, and district sports associations. There was also documentation support for the claim. Still, despite pressing further for the proof of documents, they were unable to provide anything in writing to show that they had indeed notified the athletes of the latest selection criteria. In other words, athletes could not prepare themselves for the games and for the selection based on the so-called new selection criteria. And in the end, that led to a lot of disputes and controversies about the lack of fairness of the SFNOC. The SFNOC had different sets of selection criteria that are totally different, and they are not in the public domain, and only a handful of coaches were aware of these different criteria. We find it unacceptable because they are publicly funded and athletes have spent most of their lives training for the international events with a view to bringing honor to Hong Kong by winning in these games. And yet they could work behind closed doors, covering up the selection criteria to the extent that some athletes did not have a chance to compete and fight for honor of Hong Kong in these games. Very rarely does the Public Accounts Committee openly criticizes witnesses attending our public hearing. But if you refer to our report, there is a section in relation to witness evidence given at the hearings. That's page 103 or page 110 in the English version. We are of the view that in answering our questions at the hearings, they've answered evasively, providing inconsistent and multi-version answers to the same question at the hearing. And that did not happen only at a single hearing or to the same question, but on different occasions. For example, when I asked Mr. Ronnie Wong whether he was a board of director of the Hoi Tin Swimming Association, he staunchly answered in the negative. It wasn't until I dug out information about the Swimming Association that he admitted that he was a director. On another matter, we asked why 3 months before the Asian Games, one athlete was suffering a serious injury on his lower limb. There was bone fracture. It was very serious, and yet they decided to let him participate in the Asian Games. At the public hearing, they answered with clarity that they had proof from the medical doctor in writing proving that this athlete was deemed suitable to take part in the Asian Games. And yet subsequently, when they provided letters to us, they had not raised this issue at all. They had not mentioned anything about the doctor's letter. And that doctor did not relate to the Asian Games. It related to what happened after the public hearing had taken place in June 2020. As a post-consultation note, the doctor said that the athlete was medically safe to receive training again with assistive devices. The doctor did not say that the athlete at the time was suitable for taking part in such a high-level competitive event as the Asian Games. And after forwarding this letter to the committee, the witness claimed that it should not and could not be disclosed and attached to the report. And at the hearing, they also claimed the following. In relation to the breaststroke event, why they didn't allow the quickest swimmer in Hong Kong to take part in the Asian Games, and they cited from the head coach of the NSA that this athlete did not have adequate training and that the condition of the athlete was deteriorating. However, when we asked for the head coach's letter, which is what I have at hand, the conclusion is completely different. It says here, despite inadequate training, and there is an explanation, because the elder brother of the athlete had a serious accident and passed away as a result. This athlete managed to pick himself up again, and and he had continued to improve, and that's in black and white. And yet the SF and OC had taken the answer out of context and distorted the information in the letter. Despite the athlete's obvious improvement, they claim that the athlete was to the contrary. I've been in the PAC for 4 years. I haven't seen such a dishonest witness.
This is deliberately misleading the members of the PAC. If we didn't ask him for the text of this letter, we would have believed him and wrongly blamed the athlete. Now, this letter, and likewise the SFOC, objected to our putting this letter into our report saying that it has privacy issues. However, they were actually framing the athlete, claiming that his form was deteriorating. For that particular information, they agreed that we should put it in our report. So what kind of standard is that for the SFOC? I am very, very angry. Why is it that for an organization which claims to actually, ensure fair competition, that is SFOC, how can they operate in a black box? I'm really worried that for such a ridiculous case to happen, I wonder there have been other similar cases, in the swimming, sector. Of all the scenario I described just now, the fastest swimmer, was not able to attend the Asian Games. On the other hand, an athlete who was seriously injured 3 months before the Asian Games, he was allowed to participate in the games. And the NSA, which this swimmer belongs to, the board member, Ronnie Wong was a board member. He is the chairman of the selection committee as well as the secretary general of the SFOC. And he claimed that he did not know that this swimmer, this athlete, had suffered a serious injury, and that he didn't know that under such conditions, this athlete was able to attend the Asian Games. He claimed that he didn't know at all. If you ask whether I believed him, I can assure you that I do not believe him 100%. I hope that just because you are an NSA, you are the head of an NSA, you can actually hide all the facts. I also hope that those in the sports sector will not always, worry that if you disclose all these, unreasonable practices, corrupt practices, you would actually keep quiet because you don't want to affect your chances of being selected. So if very few people dare to come forward to actually, review these corrupt practices in the sports sector. Ms. Chen. Well, Chairman, I don't have very much to add. I think if you're interested, you can read our report. Basically, we want to talk about the selection mechanism, which actually is at variance with what they say in the Articles of Association. They have an appeal board, but that mechanism has never been triggered because there could be numerous reviews in the selection process, but these procedures are not clearly stipulated. I just want to say that, first of all, I think at the Regional Affairs panel meeting, you would have learned that government will provide a time-specific funding to the SFOC, $5 million per annum, for it to review the governance of all the NSAs. So it will be for a period of 5 years. So by using the $5 million, hopefully it can improve the governance of the NSAs. When you heard about the Hong Kong FA, I think, which we covered in Chapter 1, which is a very long-standing NSA, I think they have also fallen short very seriously. Another example would be Swimming Association, and there are several dozen others. I wonder whether the staff will have the clout to really, spearhead these reforms. I'm really worried. We might have sent them money, but we may not see any results. In 2010, the ICAC issued a best practice reference, focusing particularly on the NSAs. But even now, those recommendations have not yet been fully implemented. So we're going to spend $5 million every year to review that situation, and what will transpire going forward, we don't know. So the SFOC doesn't seem to be covered For example, the selection process is not very transparent. If they cannot set a good example itself, how can they really lead all the NSAs to do better? So I'd like to take this opportunity. I think I think at the hearing I didn't have a chance to raise this point regarding selection. Now the Audit Commission mentioned that there is an appeal mechanism, and we can make reference of the practice in other jurisdictions. Our secretariat in 2015 did compile a report, for example, regarding SFOC, and I think there's one section regarding accountability, appeals mechanism for athletes, and so on. And they also made some reference of the practice in other jurisdictions, which is also mentioned in the audit report. So our Secretariat's research division has made, lots of contribution. You may not be aware of that, but this is a very good summary. So I hope you can also make reference of this report. The SFOC may also make reference of the recommendation regarding appeals mechanisms in this report. Thank you. Vice Chairman, I'd like to declare my interest. I was a former athlete. I still now attend some of the major activities of the Swimming Association. Coming back to what my colleagues have touched on earlier, I'd like to make 3 points. In the selection process of these major NSAs, the communication between SFOC and the NSAs, say take the Swimming Association, for example, and its subsidiary clubs like South China and Hoi Tin Swimming Association, and also the affiliated clubs affiliation with the swimmers. I think there's a lot of problems because the criteria or the standard of the SFOC were not actually made known to the swimmers, so they didn't know what standard they need to achieve before they qualify to attend the Asian Games or the Olympic Games. There are also some hidden rules which were not disclosed to the swimmers. For example, the athletes who took part in the relay team, if they have a very good chance to win medals, even though that athlete was a bit slow for the individual items, they stand a better chance of being selected. And this is not one thing that was not directly disclosed to the athletes, that recipients of Hong Kong SI scholarship will get a better chance. So the swimmers didn't know about that criteria. And it's not just for the swimming, for the sports of swimming. I think the same situation may arise in other sports. Like Tan Ye Chen said, the so-called review simply means submission of papers for circulation among members of the selection committee, and that would be the review, and no meeting was actually convened. Thirdly, how conflicts of interest were addressed. Well, there is a system for declaration of interest, but if some members of the selection committee had relatives or children or family members who are amongst the athletes to be subject to the selection, there is no mechanism for them to abstain. The so-called conflict of interest, according to them, may only be pecuniary interest. Conflict of interest in terms of familiar relationship, when there's no way to deal with that. Well, we've spent so much money, subsidizing our elite athletes and the different scholarships offered by the SI. I hope that all athletes will have a fair chance to represent Hong Kong, to participate in international events, and to fight for the glory of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Before I open the floor for questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat of the Legislative Council, especially Anthony, and our legal advisor, because they'll be leaving us. So I wish you all the best, and I thank you for helping us with the research throughout the years. All research work is fact-based. As we establish facts, we had finding of the facts in preparing the reports, be it criticism or a comment. Everything is based on the finding of facts. And the Secretariat has offered us a lot of help. They've spent a lot of time helping us. Well, this is already the last meeting, and we have only been able to submit the report today. We've done our level best with the help of the Secretariat, so thank you. Next, I'd like to say that we've held 53 public hearings over the past 4 years. We went through 21 different topics, and we found that apart from the relevant bureau or department or the chief secretary for administration, which would read our report, other government departments don't seem to be very concerned about our reports. They haven't made reference to our comments in improving the governance. Over the past 4 years, we had 53 public hearings, all on problems identified in government bureaus and departments at different times. Because the purpose of the report is to chart a way forward so as to save public money and avoid repeat of the problems. Because otherwise, it involves a waste of money and time. These are forward-looking reports. I do hope that government bureaus and departments will read our reports to improve the governance. So, thank you. I'll open the floor now.
Okay, English news. First of all, a question about the Football Association. How do you think the poor management of the money affected the development of the sports itself? And also, Tanya mentioned the difficulties in pushing for reforms in some of the big sports associations, and you've linked it to the presence of some powerful figures in the associations. Could you explain more in English why do you think these two things are related?
Firstly,
and finally, I'm sorry, final question, Mr. Sheck. You mentioned just now that you are the departments that are not mentioned in your reports usually don't bother to make reference to them. What problem does it lead to in the administration's governance? Thank you.
First, to answer your last question, that why I say this, I feel sad that a lot of government bureaus, a lot of government departments have not actually learned from the lessons committed by some other departments whom we investigated and write the reports. We make recommendations, and every time when we make recommendations, the CS stood up and defend government's department to the extent that they would learn from those lessons, but those lessons have not been learned. Billions of dollars have been wasted in terms of contract administration, organization structure, poor governance. All these are common repetitions of a lot of cases that we have studied over the 53 hearings on 21 subjects. Regarding personality, we don't look at personalities as such in our report. We look at cases of how those happen. My colleague, who have spent so much time in looking into the selection criteria of the candidates for international competition, rather than looking at individual, we look at the selection criteria and how those cases were highlighted. For instance, that the transparency is not there to the extent that candidates or even some coaches are not aware that to have a scholarship in the Sport Institute help them a little bit in the meeting the criteria, and secondly, other factors also included. But what we were saying in this report, everything must be transparent, especially the stakeholders must be aware of, and that we have spent a lot of time. As regards to the Football Association, personalities involved, we have not discussed the issue of personalities, but we are looking into the positions that they held, that they take the position over years and have not attended meetings, and that is something, is what we term as bad governance. 有冇需要答 ？OK， 邊位？
Yes. Who else? Good afternoon. I have a question. In your report, you express strong resentment as in relation to the evidence provided by given by Mr. Ronnie Wong and Mr. Chang. You find them incredible. So, are you deeply disappointed in them? Will there be any follow-up action? I will first take your question, and then Mr. Lam can supplement. First, we do not look at the personalities. We spend a lot of time looking at the positions they held, and it's a bona fide service without reward. However, with so much time spent on the positions, they have a fiduciary duty and they're required to fulfill the duties. They must do their level best. We are looking at what happened in hindsight, what should have been happened, but we're not looking at it from the perspective of their personalities. Mr. Lam. For these hearings, they were not summoned under oath or affirmation. They are not summoned according to the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. So from the legal point of view, there is no legal avenue available for us to follow up on the inconsistency in their testimonies or the lies, in my view, that they told. But let me appeal to the public. Any person, any witness who will testify at our hearing in the future, you must be fully prepared, because we will be putting questions to you relating to the report. And if you're unsure, you should go back and check and give us a written reply later. But you must not talk nonsense at the hearing. And all along at the hearings, I have been putting questions to Mr. Ronnie Tong and Mr. Chang, and I really have the impression that they just made the whole thing up in the testimonies. And it's really shocking. In the past 4 years, I have never come across a witness who repeatedly provided incorrect answers to our committee, to the extent that so much time has been wasted dwelling into these wrong answers. We are shocked and we feel alarmed.
Regarding consequences, and I'm not talking about the present term. During the last term, I was also a member of the Public Accounts Committee. During the hearings of the last term, there were also many exciting, items, and I won't repeat them one by one. After the hearing, I was a lead member in that hearing. I can say this because the hearing is concluded. After that hearing, I did, complain to the ICAC regarding that incident. I think the chairman is aware of that. The ICAC actually opened a file and initiated an investigation. That investigation is concluded. The ICAC decided not to prosecute. But I can say this, that it's not that there won't be any consequences. When in the case of a serious, if it's a serious case, there will be consequences. Well, it doesn't mean that it's over after we've drafted our report. There are follow-up items which we will follow up to ensure that all our recommendations are implemented before we would close our files. We have clearance sheets, and sometimes, a particular case may be followed up for more than 10 years. I've been, a member of the PAC for 20 years, and there have been cases long-standing, which is even, older than that. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, and our legal advisor.